We've got a fair few on the webinar now. We can get started, I would say.
Okay, perfect. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Michael Case. I'm a talent consultant and executive recruiter focused on people and talent roles for Series A through E startups. Here with Liv, who's the head of marketing for Findem, and very happy to welcome Tracy Edkins, who is the HR advisor and former CHR at Splunk, as well as a number of other wonderful companies. Super experienced in the people space. We're gonna talk about how to make recruiting your strategic advantage. So to start with, just a few housekeeping things. Everyone's muted, so if you're not muted, please mute yourself just to make sure. We're going to use the chat box for questions, so feel free to put them through as you go, and we'll be monitoring them, and we'll try to answer your questions. And just to be clear, we are recording this session and this webinar, so we'll be sending it to all of you after, and it will be available for others as well. So welcome to the fourth webinar in Findem's HR 2.0 webinar series, and we are going to talk about how to make the talent function more data-driven and strategic. Let me start with Tracy. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, perfect. So you've been in the HR and people space for a while, a long time.
We don't need to say exactly how long.
I was going to say the same thing. I was calculating how long I've been in this space, and it maybe just better not to ask that exact question, but gives you some credibility. Can you tell me a little bit about your professional background and how you've worked with or related to talent acquisition in your role as a chief HR officer?
You bet. Yeah. So I was lucky to find my way into HR right early in my career. My passion is people, and it always has been. And I've been fortunate to work for a number of companies that, shared my belief that it's all about the people. My background is high growth companies across various industries, tech, retail, consumer products, enterprise software, you name it. Most recently, I was with Splunk as a CHRO for 4 years, and I was with eBay and Starbucks prior to that. And in all of those cases, it was hyper growth environments where we were doubling in size, typically year over year, not just in revenue, but in people too. And that doesn't happen without strong talent acquisition team, as we all know. So in most cases, I either managed the TA function or I partnered with them very closely. In all cases, I relied on them hugely. And I think about TA as a strategic enabler, and I think about it as the starting point of the employee life cycle, and something that really can be kind of a cultural and tone setter for the organization.
Yeah, when you mentioned doubling year on year, I got like a little like sort of spider senses or goosebumps or something, having experienced that as well. It is super intense and really hard, and so it sounds like you've been through it, um, as have I. To the point of our question, so you've experienced this where the talent function is part of this, the big part of the growing the company, doubling the company. But it still seems, I was literally just on another call just now with a CFO, and it seems like there's still this thought that talent or recruiting is a cost center. What's up with that?
Yeah, it's a frustrating situation, and hopefully it's not always the case. And for our listeners today, I'm hoping that you might be in an enlightened environment. But the truth is that at the end of the day, talent acquisition, in my experience, in probably the last 3 companies that I worked at, it's 50% of the total HR budget. So talent acquisition is critically important. But if you think about the spectrum of deliverables that an HR function is responsible for, beyond finding the right talent, you've got to onboard them and train them and make sure you're paying them well and having global benefits that are up to your employee value proposition. And then you've also got to be thinking about diversity and inclusion and org design and leadership and coaching and org efficiency and retention. And then COVID came and you've got to have remote working strategies. So when you think about the spectrum of things, et cetera, I didn't even list everything. And you know that as a CHRO, for example, 50% of your budget is going to TA, it puts pressure. And the other sad reality beyond what you pointed out, Michael, is that HR budgets aren't generally, overfunded. So without effective quality, maybe diversity and effectiveness measures, it's sometimes not seen as a strategic cost. And that can be from a CFO lens for sure, maybe a CEO, but sadly also from CHROs because of the pressure that they're under.
Thank you for talking from the standpoint of that CHRO. I know it's hard, but there is, as we both know, there is sometimes a tension between the recruiting side and the HR side, and sometimes they're in the same org, sometimes they're not. But in the end, we are literally working on the same problem, right? So thanks for addressing it, and it's super tricky. I think you talked a little bit about strategy here and the difference. The question of cost relates to that as well. What does business enablement and strategy mean in the context of recruiting? How should recruiting or talent be perceived in an org where it's working really well?
Well, recruiting doesn't just happen, behind the scenes, right? And the ability to attract the right talent in a timely manner, it is the number one thing I think that impacts a company's ability to achieve their business objectives. Because achieving your business objectives is all about people, and if you don't have the people, it's not going to happen. Failure to be able to bring in the right people at the right time, at the right quality level, will prevent you from executing your strategy. And I think the ideal state is when the talent acquisition team is able to demonstrate how they are actually increasing their quality of hire, increasing the diversity, not just talking about it, but actually moving the needle in a way that is measurable. If a talent acquisition team can be data-driven, we can move from that age-old concept that recruiters, they just shepherd the process. They're just touching the gears along the process, which is a frustrating statement that we've all heard, and move instead to my recruiter is a superhero, who enables my business. And to me, that's the ideal state.
That's like music to my ears. And it does then beg the question of what is holding back? What's holding recruiting back from being either seen as more strategic, or really, to be honest, just being more strategic and not focusing just on that tactical stuff day by day?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had a very, very strong partnership with my head of TA at Splunk, and we talked about this quite a bit. And the challenge is that in the reality is there's still so many manual tasks that the recruiting team needs to execute on every day. And they generally are sourcing across multiple tools and getting imprecise matches that aren't meeting their needs. And then what about breaking biases with the client? You can say, is that a manual task or a strategic task? But there's a lot of times people are just having to go through the motions of having conversations with hiring managers about why they need to be approaching their search differently. And so all of those things can get in the way of the more strategic conversation.
Totally. There's as we both know, especially when you're growing a company so fast, there is just a lot of what I call cat herding. I don't have a better term for it.
Yeah.
And just today with another client, I saw, someone who decided that they don't want to do references because they trust their gut. And so there's a small example of where the talent has to step in and said, your gut's probably great, but we actually have a process for this. And whether or not you agree with references or not, just because it's your gut is probably not the right answer of why you shouldn't be doing it, right?
Yes.
But I think one thing that I've noticed in my career took me a long time to get to is getting at the data. to make the argument, especially in technology companies where the founder, the CEO is typically pretty data driven, or in a large public company where you're at a scale where data is really the only thing that talks, right? And when we think about data, we probably want to talk about technology as well. So pivoting a little bit, I wonder if you can tell me what things you get excited about in the technology space in talent acquisition, that will actually help our viewers think about how to be more strategic.
Yeah, absolutely. And every CHRO today is under pressure from their organization to be more data driven. And there are technologies out there that are solving these problems. And my advice to TA teams and to CHROs is just automate what can be automated. It's happening all around us. We need to be more data driven. And you can use AI to search by attribute versus just looking in the past, all we did is look at what job, who had what job. That's so limiting. Now you can actually search by attribute, and you can reduce, those bias-based gates to entry, and really start to move the needle on whatever the stated goals of your company are. Most organizations have an understanding of where their skill gaps are. They know they have goals around diversity. And if you want to solve those problems, you can do it by automating what can be automated. The phrase I like is find the unfindable, especially in a world now with thanks to COVID, we're not restricted by a candidate's geography. So we can just broaden the spectrum so much by leveraging AI.
It's a great point. I think that bias that you talk about, we see so much, right? Um, I was in a thread on one social media platform the other day where people were talking about having a resume versus LinkedIn versus other things, and they're all the same. You have this incredible bias of someone worked at so and so place, therefore they must be good. It's a proxy. It's kind of the best one that we've got, but it's also it lets us ignore or leads us to ignore so many potential candidates that could be great.
Yes.
And then we're not even talking about the whole compensation discussion that is connected to that as well, right?
Absolutely.
So that's maybe the great segue. And I should point out, I am drinking tea, not beer at 3. I'm in Tokyo. This is 3 a.m. Tokyo time, and I'm drinking tea, not beer, just in case anyone wasn't clear about that.
Sure.
Not St. Patrick's Day yet. That brings us to Findem Live. You are in marketing at Findem. Can you talk about a little bit what Findem does and why we're on this call?
Sure, yeah. And I have to clarify, it's coffee in my mug as well. So on West Coast time. Yeah, well, as Tracy mentioned, a company's people are fundamentally what enables it to succeed. And so Findem's all about helping companies close their talent and diversity gaps by finding the right people at the right time and using data to help companies build the most engaged teams they can that are going to really drive the business forward. So I'd say how we do that is through our people intelligence platform. And again, tapping to what Tracy was talking about with AI, we use AI and machine learning to provide solutions for 2 key functions, being talent acquisition and people analytics. So digging just a little deeper into each of those, on the talent acquisition side, we help recruiting teams to automate the sourcing of candidates, increase candidate quality and diversity, and also deliver this kind of 360-degree view of the talent pool and pipeline, which can be really valuable for making those strategic people decisions. And then on the people analytics side, we use internal and external people data to give people teams insights about their org, as well as competitive insights that they're going to help them to decide what the best direction is for the company.
I think you mentioned there the automated sourcing bit. That's interesting. Tracy and I have both hired, huge teams in sourcing, in recruiting in general, but also sourcing, dozens of people that are out there trying to find candidates. How does that work with Findem?
Yeah, so I think we tend to characterize sourcing as end-to-end sourcing. So we're automating that whole process from finding matching candidates, shortlisting the top matches, and then sending personalized campaigns automatically to those candidates. So the result is emails from interested candidates straight in the recruiter's inbox, which is really the goal. And so to pick up on something that Tracy was talking about earlier, I'd say one of the unique things about Findem is how we can help companies to search for people by their attributes rather than keywords. And by attributes, I mean really any of the skills, experiences, qualities, characteristics that hiring managers are looking for, but that aren't usually expressed on someone's resume. So I guess for all of us, when we're hiring, whether we're in the talent team or the hiring manager, we usually have really broad lists, wish lists of things that we want in a candidate. So, I mean, let's say you're a security startup company, you're hiring for a software engineer. You might want someone who's got startup experience, who's scrappy, who's had experience in the security space. Maybe they have had rapid career growth, so they're hungry and proactive, someone who could make your org more diverse. And all of these attributes are things you want in an ideal candidate, but none of them are searchable using traditional methods. And so it takes this inordinate amount of work, Boolean searches to get a long list of candidates, then interviewing multiple times to filter out candidates who might not meet those requirements, a lot of data analysis and so on, really to get to that perfect fit. And so essentially, what we want in a candidate and what we can search for traditionally have been two different things, and Findem's about eliminating that gap. So I think you asked me a bit about how it works, or to dig into the automated sourcing. So I would say the foundation of Findem is kind of like a Google for people data. So we can refer to multiple data streams at the same time to get those attributes. And so an example of that would be, let's say, our software engineer that we want in this startup space who's got startup experience. You can't really search for startup experience on LinkedIn because every company at some point is a startup. But when we look at all data, we can triangulate when someone was at a company, what stage the company was at that time, what growth they saw. You can get to exactly that attribute. So that's just one example, but that holistic view really helps talent teams not just automate the process, but go beyond resumes. And so you're getting that much more complete picture of an individual without having to do all of that manual work. And I think another valuable piece to this is we're automating finding of candidates, not just externally, so whether candidates are looking for a job or not, but also your internal employees. So they might be a match, and you've got internal mobility benefits there, as well as profiles in your ATS. So you can keep those current and see if there are matches there.
So that's great. The that helps me understand on a sort of tactical or functional level. Can you bring it a little bit higher level and talk about it on a more strategic level, how Findem helps to address the questions that Tracy and I are talking about?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, because I think we can easily get drawn into the practicalities of the solution. But I would say it's really three core things that Findem does that helps talent teams become more strategic and really enable the business. And the first is a little bit what we talked about already, and enabling talent teams to be really strategic about the start of the talent search. That's where it all begins. And you can find people using those exact attributes you're looking for and get that visibility into your pipeline. So strategically, then you can source for culture add without having to do a phone screen. You can also source for diversity attributes. So what we're doing by making that start of the talent search more precise and strategic is helping talent teams to bring in the exact people the business needs at the least amount of lift, and architect and find their ideal candidate. So that's the first thing, is just being really precise and strategic at that beginning of every talent search. Second thing I would say, stepping back from the start of the search, is even before you get to sourcing talent, we can use attributes to think about what are the company's talent gaps. So we can identify for every person what makes them who they are. So we can see what makes superstar talent so super at your company, as well as competitor companies or peer companies. And so with that kind of insight, you can figure out what are the types of people you need to hire for to kind of drive the business forward. And then third, I would say the automation is actually something that enables strategy, because if you're using a platform that automates all of those repetitive manual parts of the sourcing process, that frees up recruiters to spend their time speaking on the phone and closing candidates. So there's actually time to execute on that broader talent strategy, and company initiatives like making the business more diverse, like hiring for different skill sets or experience levels, that there just isn't time for when people are spending, up to 70% of their time finding and researching candidates.
And something we've discussed before with you and both with Hardy, the founder of Findem, is that the best recruiters just want to be on the phone with their internal client or their candidate, right? They're not great at admin stuff. That's not why we hire them. So that's wonderful. I want to ask you a little bit more about data, Liv, but I want to take it a little bit bigger picture and take it up a level and go back to Tracy and just talk about AI and automation in general. These technologies like Findem, and there's other things out there as well. How do you see this affecting the talent space?
Well, and you mentioned Hari. I know in the conversations I've had with Liv and Hari and talking about the power that Findem unlocks, the analogy that I had was it shifts the paradigm from recruiters as process pushers to that of what I called cape wearers. When I mentioned superheroes earlier, the classic example that every recruiter can identify with is you take a list of candidates to a hiring manager and they say something like, I know all these people, or I know half of these people. To be able to come to them with a list like what Liv just talked about, where you're finding people based on their attributes, the skills that they had based on the time in the company they were at, you can become a superhero, where the hiring manager is looking at you and seeing a cape on your shoulders saying, wow, and those people who had that relationship with a hiring manager, how golden it is, when they rely on you to be able to find the unfindable. And to me, that's what AI and automation can do, in addition to allowing the TA function to demonstrate that they are finding people that are better skill matches. They're helping them, as Liv just talked about, fill talent gaps, truly moving the needle on diversity. Every company talks about it. They probably have goals. AI is allowing us to actually move the needle in a tangible way, because there's, for those of us who've been in this business for a long time, we're tired of the talk. We want to do something that is actually moving the needle. And then we want to be able to let the data speak for it. And that's just a huge thing that AI and Findem unleashes. And of course, reduced costs, which every CHRO, that's what they want. Every conversation a CHRO might have with the TA leader is like, hey, you're 50% of my budget. Can you show me how you are, reducing your cost of hire and improving quality?
Yeah, in my last hyper growth role, we were probably 90% of the budget in talent. We were spending $1 million a month, so it definitely got noticed. Which is actually a great segue to my next question on, how do you think these technologies will help people in my seat, in the talent seat, be more strategic and be more, have that higher level of service to the client, the internal client here, the business.
Yeah, like I said, I think every, TA leaders, TA recruiters and TA leaders, they show up to work every day because they want to exceed the expectations of their clients. They want to find the best talent in the most efficient manner possible. And, and I believe that the whole TA function is ripe for disruption because of everything that we talked about. So much manual tasks, so much manual process pushing. That's not what gets people out of bed in the morning. They want to be the power in the engine in the company it's helping everything come together. And to me, that's what Findem allows the recruiters to do.
That's great. I was still thinking on wearing the cape, and I want to wear the cape. So I love that. I love that thought, because as we both know, so often HR/people/talent, we are getting in trouble, or getting the blame rather than getting the glory. But I want that cape. So that really resonates with me. You actually begged a pretty good question, though. When I started in recruiting, we didn't have things like LinkedIn, or we had the internet, but I mean, I learned from people that were still faxing resumes. So, that this dates me a little bit. I didn't ever fax a resume, but I learned from those people. Tell me a little about the recruiting tech stack. How do we think about our tech stack in recruiting specifically as these AI tools come into play?
Yeah. I would say every CHRO and TA leader needs to be thinking about how they're leveraging technology. How are they leveraging AI and ML to, as I said, find the unfindable? How are they using it to eliminate bias-based gates to entry for the talent? And how do they move the needle, as I said already, on diversity versus just talking about it? And the only way to do that is really, you've got to leverage technology. You've got to automate what can be automated by, and you've got to keep the parts that can't be automated, the truly strategic parts, in the hands of your team. You want human-led technology, right? And like you and Liv mentioned, you want to be able to have your recruiters spending the time where they add the most value, which is in that connection, in the one-on-one conversations. So yeah, it's really about understanding the technologies that are out there and not being afraid to embrace technology.
Yeah, one thing I think about is there's sometimes I think us TA leaders are guilty of wanting to build the biggest team. And technology can actually reduce the size of our team, and that's, if there's two opposing incentives there, right? But I agree. We need to think about what is the right application of our dollars into technology to get the right call, which is actually begs another really good question of measurement of the TA function. I was once fired despite meeting all of our hiring targets, because I grew up learning that your job as a TA leader is to make the hiring target, and if you make that, everything's good. What are the other metrics that we could be communicating to show the value of our function besides just hitting the hiring goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've seen that too, where, hiring goals were met, and yet we weren't moving the needle in other ways, like capability gaps, et cetera. So I think that the future of TA really comes down to, how can you demonstrate that you're actually improving your quality of hire over time? How can you demonstrate that the people that you're bringing in are not being what we call in the business, right, quick quitters? Like, how are you demonstrating that you're finding the people that are going to stay? Obviously, time to hire is important, but the other is diversity. If talent acquisition isn't the gatekeeper on diversity and really focusing on that, it's not going to happen, because that's your lever. That is your biggest lever to truly create diversity. And we know that diverse teams lead to more quality output and more success and more revenue. And that, that business imperative has been clearly stated and proven. So talent leaders have a huge role to play in making this connection, not just understood, but realized.
That diversity question, it is so, as you said, Tracy, so important to get right. But let's face it, most companies, certainly in tech, and tech is the biggest growth engine right now in probably the global economy, they're not getting it. Like, we're not meeting the mark. I wonder, Liv, not to put you on the spot, but when we think about diversity, you've mentioned that's a big thing for Findem. How does Findem actually help companies find more diverse candidates?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's a great question, because there are so many technologies out there that say they're going to help you increase the diversity of your talent pool or increase the diversity of your company. And I think it's really important to look at how do those technologies actually do that. And so what I would say for Find Them is, I think the first thing is going back to what we were talking about with attributes. So diversity attributes are selectable at the start of each talent search with Find Them. So you can actually prioritize diverse candidates, whether that's at the abstract level or really in a granular way, looking at gender, ethnicity, or other inclusion attributes. And because of the way that we index and triangulate people data, we don't rely on that information being disclosed by individuals. It's based on public data sets that are all verified and integrated into the platform. So you immediately have real visibility into the start of your talent search, and you can make those prioritization changes. Second, I would say, just at a glance, you can look at the diversity of your talent pool. So if you're looking for someone with a certain set of attributes, diversity maybe being one of them, you can see at a glance, okay, with these attributes that I'm looking for, what does my talent pool look like? And you can adjust attributes to increase the diversity of your talent pool. You can shift things around. Another thing I think is really important is when it comes to the pipeline, being able to measure diversity, like Tracy was referencing. So I think one of the things that I love about the platform is you can see in real time the location of your talent. And so you can slice and dice that data by diversity attributes. So you could see, for example, all the female engineers and where they exist in the US or in the world to meet your goals. And that might affect strategic decisions like where you put recruiting efforts, for example. And you can see other things about the pipeline. You can see connections between candidates and people in your own network, which can help with referrals, and you can kind of get to that diverse talent better and faster. And seeing trends, where are people being hired from in your company or other companies, where are they leaving and going to? All of that information about the movement of candidates is visible in one kind of dashboard view. So I think that's the data-driven element that is sometimes missing when companies are trying to increase the diversity of their workforce, because it's impossible to get that data without a ton of manual work in most cases. And then, so that's all on the data side. I would say it's also important to reference the automation side, because when the technology is automating in an effective way candidate matching, shortlisting, and outreach, you're also reducing human bias that would otherwise be entering every stage of that process. And so it's not just data, it's also accountability in terms of how we move through the recruiting for organizations.
Well, I mean, anything that can help us work with bias, right? We all know that there's implicit bias across so many parts of our hiring process, and that's just before people come into the company. After people come into the company, we have a whole nother stack of issues as well that we need to get better at. As I think about this tech stack, though, back to you, Tracy. If we get good, when talent leaders get good, they implement this tech stack. They've got an optimized system. Things are going well from their perspective. How do you communicate that as an HR leader to the rest of the org?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we know that leaders and hiring managers are very much waking up to this need for diverse teams, based on unique attributes and all of the good stuff that we've covered today. Once this is actually embedded inside the organization, the talent leaders can finally, be seen for the value add that they bring versus simply being these process pushers that we've mentioned. They can free up time to engage the hiring managers in a more thoughtful conversation around human capital strategies. They can sit down with those hiring managers and start to think about seeing around the corners and help them think about the types of people that they need in a year from now, not just yesterday, which is the current reality that we live in, especially in these high growth environments. What worked yesterday doesn't work tomorrow, and that relates to the talent on the teams as well. So once you have this up and running, you start to have those kinds of conversations around the capability gaps versus just plugging holes. And of course, being a data-driven organization will allow the TA team to share their value and their impact to the rest of the organization with no ambiguity. Like you mentioned, you can hit your hiring goals and not be a hero. Here, the data will speak for yourself, and you can hold yourselves accountable and as well to know the job that you're doing, and you can broadcast to the organization.
It's I talk about this a lot, but the overall people function, the talent function as well, it really is a general management function. Now, everything you just mentioned is, I think 20 years ago was not part of the remit of being an HR leader, right? Like to really think so strategically, and that's that's where we've tried to get for these couple decades, right, to become that strategic partner. So it's interesting to hear your thoughts on how we approach that. We do have a couple of questions coming in, and I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time for that. So if others on the call have more questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat there, and we'll do our best to answer them if we can. One that's come up, Tracy, is we're hearing a lot about technology and automation and AI, but when is it going to be real? Like when is this going to become normal for companies to have this kind of technological solution to hiring?
Tomorrow. I mean, if we just think about, that the expression, real change always takes longer than we think it should, and then suddenly it happens before we think it could, So I think that it's upon us. And I think that if you're not worried about it, then you better be, because I think that it's the future, and I think it's going to be upon us tomorrow.
So we're not just talking about flying cars here.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Brilliant. Another question, maybe Liv, this one's right for you to answer. It's about Findem specifically. Why did the founders at Findem think about this diversity problem? Why are they focused on that?
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, it goes to the heart of why someone would start a company. And I think that Findem was started by our CEO and CTO, Hari and Raghu. They're deep infrastructure engineers by background, and they'd started, founded and seen through a company before. And I think through that experience really knew that building the right team is the most important job of any business leader, right? And they'd seen the pain of companies trying to find the right talent in a really competitive market while growing really fast, and trying to build more diverse teams. And so when they came to thinking about starting a new company, they wanted to apply that infrastructure and data expertise to solving that problem, because it has such a real world impact. If we can make companies more diverse, if we can make the whole world of recruiting and talent more equitable, that has massive social as well as business implications. And so that's certainly something that I was excited about when I joined the company, and I think it continues to be part of the mission today.
It's so interesting coming to this recruiting and hiring problem, this people problem, from truly from an engineering perspective, right? Which is different from a lot of the other technologies that I look at and review as in my side job with my other hat as an investor. But that actually was a good question that came up in the chat from Tracy. When we think about technology, when talent leaders are trying to get buy-in, and when I say buy-in, we're literally asking for money. How do we get people like you, the CHRO, to back what we're doing? How do we get you to get us the money for a new technology?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two vectors. One is with a product like Findem, you actually will reduce your sourcing costs, and that's what every CHRO wants to hear, because they've got a whole bunch of other things they need to fund, as I mentioned earlier. So, reducing the sourcing costs and being able to demonstrate through data, that you're moving the needle on diversity and filling these skill gaps. But another thing that Liv mentioned that would be very interesting to your CHRO is this capability that Findem has to actually look and see what, not only who worked at a company at a certain state in their growth, but the size and shape of that organization. That's very, very interesting information. So if you're in a company that's has a company that they can look at and say, hey, we're kind of like them. We aspire to be them. What did they look like when they were exactly our size? What was their distribution? How many people did they have in these different functions? And who were they? Findem has that capability. And that's a very, very strategic aspect for a CHRO as well.
Final question, because we're wrapping up, and this is something there was one question in the chat that alluded to this as well, but we were going to ask this anyway. Back to our full-on original topic is how to turn recruiting from a cost center into a business enabler. Any final words of advice from either of you on this idea?
I think that, how do you turn into a business enabler? It's really about minimizing those manual tasks so that you can be adding the value that you wish to add every day. And that's why I'm super excited about Findem, because to me, products like this are the future. Some companies might not even be thinking about this, but some are probably attempting to build something like this in-house. And based on my experience, it's just not going to have the power that this fully enabled solution has because of the AI capabilities. So I think that this whole function, as we said, is ready for disruption. And I think tools like this are what are going to lead the way.
Well, that's great to hear. We all want that support from TA to be seen as the more strategic function that we know it can be. We're just about time. I wanted to thank you both, Tracy. Thanks so much for sharing your input. You've seen some incredible growth, hyper growth. The companies will be lucky to have you as an advisor. Liv, thank you as well. If people want to find out more about Findem, how do they find them?
Sure. So I think everyone who's signed up to the webinar should have a follow-up email that provides my email address. You can send me a message directly or check out our website. We've got forms on there for requesting demo or getting in contact with us, and happy to answer any questions that people might have as well, flowing on from this conversation. So many ways to find us, as it were.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much to both of you and everyone here. Let's continue to drive the people function and the talent function forward and make sure we're all strategic together.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.